Chapter 5 in the Book of Lamentation is the same and it's different than all the other 4 chapters. It's the same that it contains 22 verses, like the alphabetical order of the Hebrew. They have from Aleph to Tav 22 letters. However, unlike the 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th chapter that have alphabetical order by Aleph Bet, this one only contained the 22 sentences, pesukim, but not the alphabetical order. Why? The difference between the others is real קינות, is real lamentations. This one, it's tefillah, it's prayer. I have the privilege many years ago to know the Rimnitzer Rebbe, the great righteous Rebbe from Rimnitz, who died at a very old age in Monsey, New York. And he was a well-known rabbi that did the Tikun Chatzut, which means special prayer at the middle of the night for the destruction of Jerusalem, but also prayer for the rejuvenation. Meaning that this chapter is not just the concluding chapter, but it's also a chapter that involved with tefillah. The main point in this chapter is tefillah, used for Tikun Chatzot. We use it many times, and the key point is the completing sentence that repeats twice, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha Venashuva, return. God, we ask God to partake of that, meaning return to us and we return to you, which soon we need to explain what does that mean. But we ask for the teshuva, for the being connected back, returning to the point of being together with God. You do not see in this chapter the tendency of asking a revenge against enemies. You don't see in these chapters some type of heavy lamentation. Yes, there are some, but it's in a very small. The key point is the idea of Hashivenu. So let's focus on the psukim first. Zchor Adonai mehaya lanu, habita ur'e et cherpatenu. Remember, God, what has befallen us. So, we explained earlier that the involvement of all kind of desecration, denigration of human being that the Jewish people went through. But we ask God to remember. Zchor. God remember everything. Why we need to ask God to remember? The answer, the Torah tells us in the Book of Shemot on Exodus, V'hayaki itzak, when a person cry out of his heart, V'shamati, and I will listen and I will accept him. The rabbis tells us that when a person is suffering and is crying out of his heart, in our language, God expedites the procedure, which means the way that the Almighty created the world is a way that by our actions we creating something that at least appear in our eyes, creating our own destiny. In that sense, when we are crying and said, please remember, God is expediting the procedure. And we use here twice the same word in a sense. We said, look and see, habita ur'e, look and see. It looks like twice. I heard from Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, who bring an allegory, like a person who goes to a exhibition, to a gallery. When you look upon a painter, so in Hebrew we call it tlat memadiyut, which means you can see it in 2 or 3 different avenues. If you see the picture close to your face or even attached to your face, versus when you see the picture from far away. When you see stories on television, on the movies, Schindler's List, all kind of Holocaust stories as an example, you'll be shocked, you're traumatized. But then you affected the most by talking to individuals. As a child, I have the privilege to talk to many survivors in my parents' neighborhood in Haifa in Israel. And the individual stories touched me much more than watching Schindler's List or watching something that happened as a general tragedy for the 6 millions. So here there are two components. Habita ur'eh, look and see, which means you see the picture from far away, you see the picture when you are close. Two components, one individual, one as a nation. Rabbi Soloveitchik tells us that it's a personal embarrassment. What does that mean, personal embarrassment? You remember we said in the previous session the famous story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the personal animosity and embarrassment that were involved with the Kamsa. And in our language, God cares for the individual embarrassment, even in such a level of creating the destruction. And again, that's the component of Habita Ur'eh, look and see, two different angles. Nachalateinu nehepcha lezarim, bateinu lenochrim. Our inheritance has been turned over to stranger, our houses to foreigners. You tell me if this is only Jeremiah speaking about the temple 2,000 years ago, or it's something that's so applicable to our times. Do you remember how in Eretz Israel they built Yamit, big cities at the 80s, spend millions or tens of millions of dollars, businesses, homes, everything was giving away to Egypt. Destroyed the entire Sinai Peninsula with all the potential of the oil businesses. You see in our days another example of Gosh Katif, how tremendous amount of people who put their lives on stake by building their homes in a dangerous place around Gaza by the original approval of the government. Yet the same government pulled them away, forced them out, and you see brothers against brothers. You see a fellow policeman and fellow Jew as a soldiers evicting his brothers and sisters from their home while they didn't finish pay the mortgage, while they still the children around. It was a horrific experiences to see the eviction of all those settlers without giving them the proper resolution of place. So you see in our days, within the success of building modern Israel, all these great crises. So when they use the text here, our inheritance has been turned over to stranger, our houses to foreigners. You see it. You see it in a very painful way. Rabbi Yoel Schwartz said, I heard it once from him, that it's like God calling us. You hear the phone rings. Now it's your choice to pick up the phone or just let it pass. And it's a signal that God's giving us. I'd like to share with you a beautiful Midrash. Is the introduction to the Midrash Eicha, the introduction for the Book of Lamentations. The story about one of the Greek, one of the wise people of the Athens. So, the Midrash repleted with the wisdom of children of Jerusalem, and one of the wise people, wise philosopher of Athens, of Greek, he traveled long distance to meet those children of Jerusalem. And the Midrash said that he met a very young child that just went to Cheder, in our language is at the age of 4 or 5 years old. And he said to the child, "Look, I'm carrying a cheese. I have 2 different baskets of cheese in my 2 hands. But here is my question to you. One came from a goat that has a black color, and one is from a goat that has a white color. Can you tell me which cheese came from what type of goat?" And the boy, the little child, imagine Cheder child, 4 or 5 years old, answer him like typical Jewish answer. He asked him a question. He went to the grocery store and he pulled out 2 eggs. And he said to that fellow, the Athens, the Greek scholar, he said to him, "I'm holding 2 eggs. Can you tell me which egg belonged to a chicken that it's a black color and one it's in a white color?" And the Greek said, "No." He said, "I can tell you in the eggs that if the chick mother will sit on the egg for a long time and you see the little chick, you can recognize which one is black color and which one is the white color." So I read in a book by Rabbi Shabtai, which was a great scholar. It's called Drashot HaMagid. He brought it from one of the greatest scholars in Jerusalem, Isa Zalman Meltzer. And he explained it in a very beautiful, deep way. What's the meaning of that story? For sure, it's not just a little tale. He asked, this Greek wise person asked this boy, what's the real difference between someone who's observant, a fellow that observant, versus someone who has nothing to do with anything, with any God, Judaism, or anything? What's the real difference between the two? And the boy answered and he said, "You're right. If you talk about cheese that come from a goat, there is no difference. But if there's a strong connectedness to the chick mother, like the egg, and the chick come out after the mother sit on the egg and connected the egg, then you see the difference between a baby chick that made of a white color or black color's mother." So here, when we talk about inheritance that had been turned over to stranger, our houses to foreigners, it means since the second Beit HaMikdash, the second temple, destroyed because of selfless hatred, there is a huge difference between the first destruction and the second destruction. The second destruction is a combination of the first, because the first was worship idol with all kind of insect. they spilling blood, all type of sins, but the second one was a combination which is much worse, the selfless hatred. The real resolution, real hashivenu, teshuva, is to understand that our inheritance has been turned over to strangers. By whom? If you look at the story of Gosh Katif, the story of Yamid, by our own people. 3. Yetomim ayinu ve'ein av. We have become orphans and fatherless. Looks like a repetitious. Orphan, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows. So there are two ways to see it. Either that is a hidden face of God, or when they're taking the leadership, when they're taking the people who are the teachers, the generation is an orphaned generation, because there's no one to teach, there's no one to tell us what's the proper path. If you read in the Tanakh, when Elisha cried out over Eliyahu, when he went up and he said, my father, which means our spiritual leaders, our teachers, this call in this language the father, the mother. So when we are facing these distractions, part of that is losing the spiritual leaders. And that's what we cry when we said Ashivenu, when we said at the end, please God return us. The same way as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses said to God, Lama Yomru Mitzrayim, why the Egyptians said that you forget them? You have to give the leaders to stay in connectedness with the people. And Yoshua, the next leader, said, Mata aseh l'shimcha gadol, what do you do to your great name? We ask God that it's in our language, it's in your interest to expedite the redemptions. We said it during the high holidays, or during the fast day, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, aseh lema'ancha im lo lema'anenu. Do it for your sake, if not for our sake. Which means we ask, when we said Adon Olam, the God, the Master of the universe, B'terem call before everything, Yetzir Nivra, and then he said, V'acharei kichlot hakol, and after we all go through all these trials and tribulations, Azai Melech Shmo Nikra, then the king will be recognized by his constituencies, by his servants. So we ask God to return the leadership, to help us to have back the leadership, so we'll not feel like we are fatherless, like orphans, like being without mother. Because when we're using the word widow, it's a very strange word in that sense. Widow meaning someone who's looking for a husband that is no longer among the existence. And here we don't use the word widows, we use in the Hebrew the word ke'almanot, like widows, which means we do not want to think or to feel like you forsake us, God. We want to feel that you will return to us, not like a widow. Meimeinu bechesef shatinu, eitzim b'mechir yavo. So Rashi here, he said, שהיו יראים לשאוב מים מן הנהר מפני האויבים והיו קונים מהם בכסף. So Rashi said here that we pay money to drink our own waters, or water for silver we drank, because the enemies, they are afraid to fetch at the river. Either instead of we're forced to purchase it in a high price from them, that's one way. Or the Al-Shikh said that because they taking possessions of our wells. So either you say that it was a tremendous subjugation, that we need to pay for our own water. If you read the history of the World War II, or you read the history of the Jews in the ghetto even before the war, you see that it was a special taxes. They asked us to pay taxes for allow us to light Shabbat candles. It's like, if you read the history of Jerusalem, it was a time for the Jews that they need to pay for going to the Western Wall. We need to pay to go to the wall and cry on Tisha B Av. That was part of the crisis. Yaganu velo nachlanu, sentence 5. Upon our neck we are pursue, we toil, but nothing is left us. That's, some said, that applied to the first destruction of the first temple, when the Jewish people carry a heavy load. I remember as a child, there was a survivor that lost his entire family. His name is Pinchas Menachem Feivelovich, may he rest in peace. And many years ago he told my brother and I a story how while he was in Auschwitz they asked them to carry very heavy loaded things as a young people, and many people die on the way of carrying it because they asked them to do labor outside of Auschwitz and they need to carry the heavy loaded, and then when people passed they asked the prisoners to bring the dead body back to the camp. So they feel that it's like this, exactly what they said, upon our necks we are pursue, we toil, but nothing is left us. If you read the story how the end of the Auschwitz, when the Russian came and it was a march for death, that's the same way as the Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, he asked to carry all this wood from Jerusalem to Babylon. 6. Mitzrayim netnu yad Ashur lisboa lachem. We explained in the previous sessions that the Egyptians betrayed us because Tzidkiyahu made an agreement with Egypt. He didn't listen to Jeremiah, and then the Egyptian betrayed us, and then we tried to make covenants with Assyrian, and it's the same thing. The Assyria to be satisfied with the bread, and again the same thing happened. The Hosea, the prophet Hosea said, Brit im Ashur yichrotu, they make a covenant with Ashur. It's a story about Yochanan ben Kareach, that he carried the whatever remnant left, and some of them went to Egypt after the death of the Gedaliah, some went to Babylon, and some ran away. And here the 7th sentence said, Avotenu chat'u ve'enam v'anachnu avotem savlu. Our fathers have sinned and are no more, and we have suffered for their iniquities. So that's a famous question, because in the Torah looks like two contradicted sentences. One said that God inflicted punishment upon the second and third generation. Another place in Deuteronomy said that sons will not die because of the sin of the parents. And Ezekiel explained to us, and Rashi explained in many sources, that it's only ochazim b'maaseh avotiem, only when the children follow the path of the parents, so they get double punishment. They get the punishment of the parents and themselves as well. However, if they change and make teshuvah, that not carry from one generation to the next. 8. Avadim mashlu banu porekem miyadam. Slaves rule us. There is no rescuer from their hands. So that's said in the Book of Proverbs, that tachat shalosh ragza haaretz, explained that what happened to the land. Says one of the things is eved v'shifcha, that is a slave all of a sudden take over the leadership. You see in many dictatorial countries, when you have someone who's not a proper king who really care for his people, kings or dictators that rule over, but before that they are just as slaves. You see that the story of Herod, he is a mass murderer, originally was a slave. You see stories of Achashverosh, you see many stories of dictators that care less for their people because they came from a royal family, they don't have the idea of king should be the one who take care of his people. And that's happened also in our story. You read the story of the Jewish couple. They took the people who are the low-life people and they make them the Jewish couple. And they are the people that create all the sorrow, not the good people. Usually they take traders and they make them the one who in charge for others. That's the high level of cruelty. The Torah said that the difference between the Jewish policemen in Egypt versus the others, it's huge, because the Jewish policemen in Egypt, they try their best not to hurt their fellow. 9. בנפשנו נביא לחמנו מפני חרב המדבר. In mortal danger we bring our bread because of the sword of the wilderness. Which means we brought food with the great dangers because the enemy is looking all around to find who are the people who are searching for food. Our skin was scorned like an oven with the fever of famine. We explained it in the previous session that when you see in people when they make a diet, and it's a sudden diet, for example, so the skin became turned to look very, very old, and because the body eat all the fats, and so it's like you take into the stove, you put a wet wood, so it creates the black color in the stoves. 11. נשים בציון ינו בתולות הרי יהודה. So they said about Nebuchadnezzar, one of the good things he did, he warned his soldiers without great success, but he asked his soldiers not to touch with the married women. So he asked Nebuzaradan and his soldier not to do it, and as a result they tell us that all the women at that time tried to claim that they are married. Either they make it married, or for real they just marry one after the others. It reminds me a story I heard from two good friends, Rabbi Shlomo Korach, the chief Sephardic rabbi of Bnei Brak, and from Rabbi Ezra Admoni, my previous chavrusa in Staten Island, New York. They told me that in the old community in Yemen, they have those problems with the sheiks that said any girls that pass the age of 18 or 19, they need to marry first to the sheik. So they used to marry men with 2 or 3 or 4 wives in the age, very young age, and they behave to each other like sisters in order to survive. So that's part of what happened at the time of great crisis. שרים בידם נתלו פני זקנים לא נהדרו. Leaders were hanged by the hands, elders were shown no respect. So if you read the Gaonic era, what they happened to Rav Shrira Gaon, how the Persian Arab tortured him, that's an example. Or the famous story of the Romans crucifixions. We talk about the whole idea of tremendous cruelty. You don't let the person die in 2 minutes, you let him die in a long process of cruelty. That's the whole idea, that you don't respect elders who have a life experiences, and you cruel in the length of the death. בחורים טחון עשו ונערים בעץ כשלו. Young men drag the milestone, and youth stumble under the wood. So again, we said that that's the Babylon that asked the young people to carry those woods from Jerusalem to Babylon. זקנים משער שבת ובחורים מנגינתם. The elders were gone from the gate, the young men from the music. So I read in a book by Rabbi Rabinovitz, the book called Reshit Chochma, that he speaks about the Gehinom. What's the definition of hell or Gehinom nowadays? And he said, if you look at the story of Auschwitz, is a good example of how the Lord took the concept of Gehinom in heaven that the rabbis talk for so long and show it in a real life to people to see what's involved. So in that sense, they want to express that the elders, the Talmidei Chachamim, they stop. The young people, they no longer play music. You see it in a wedding, even nowadays, to this very moment when they have the highest moment of joy, the groom breaking the glass. It's a sign of sadness, the destruction of Jerusalem. To this very day in the city of Jerusalem, they don't play music, only drums. The Gemara tells us that that's fascinating, that when they stop playing music in memory of the destructions, so the prices were low for all the other products. But when they belittle that and they start going back to the idea of forgetting the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, you see the high prices of food and everything. Gan is the joy, shavat mesos libenu ne'efach le'evel mecholenu, which means all the joy in our hearts. Gan is the joy of our hearts, our dancing and turn into mournings. So Ibn Ezra said that that's apply ala korbanot shenichretu, that they stop the offering. Mecholot, that a big dance turned to be a sadness. If you read in the Gemara, they tell us, and the Mishnah too in Minnesota, they tell us In Taanit, they said too that the time of the Beit HaMikdash, it was 2 big days, Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. The Tu B'Av is the festival of the matchmaker. They did a lot of shidduchim. The girls would dance around Jerusalem, and all of that was gone. Rabbi Soloveitchik said that the Tisha B Av, in the way of the mindset, it's not a day of prayer, because he used the word satam tfilati. It was a day of mourning, because we said it's lamentation. But even within the lamentation, later, after we lament all day, we have the prayer. But if you pay attention at the prayer itself, for example, Kaddish, we eliminate the word titkabel, which means all this asking God that our prayer will be accepted. Since it was not accepted, gone is the joy for our heart, and our dancing was turned into mournings. So that's eliminated on Tisha B Av. The crown of our head has fallen. Woe to us, for we have seen. Nafla teret roshenu. That's applied to the Beit HaMikdash. If you look at the groom, there are some, especially in the Hasidic sect, that they put under the kippah a little bit ashes before they go to the chuppah. But the whole idea is that there are people who recall, especially in some Sephardic communities, but you also read it in the ancient books, that they used to have a crown at the top of the groom, and the gold and silver at the head of the bride. But since Ezekiel said that exile is the Chilul Hashem, is the desecration of name of God, and we want to wake up in our language God. So in that sense, we eliminate that, and it's no longer, to this very day, until the Beit HaMikdash rebuild, the crown of our head. 17. Al ze haya dave libenu, al ele chashvu enenu. For this our hearts was faint, for this our dim. For what? Al har Zion sheshamem, for the Mount Zion which lie desolate, foxes crawled over it. So it means that the Gemara said in the famous Gemara in Makot, and that's part of the word of comfort. The Gemara said in Makot, the 24, a story about Rabbi Akiva and the sages, that they went after the destruction to Jerusalem, and they go to the Mount Scorpio, the terrorist garments. When they came close to the Holy of Holies, they saw fox coming out of the Holy of Holies. So the sages cried, and Rabbi Akiva laughed. So they asked him, why are you laughing? He said to them, why are you crying? So they said, the place that the Torah said in the Book of Numbers that any stranger will come in, will die. Now we see fox coming out of the Holy of Holies, and we should not cry. So he said, that's exactly why I'm laughing, because I'm thinking about the prophecy of Micah, who said, and the same is the prophecy of Isaiah, that said it will be a time that the elders will be in Jerusalem. You see children running and playing in the street, and you see all these prophecy will come to fruition. So if you believe in the prophecy of Jeremiah and all this prophecy of the destruction, you have to also believe in the prophecy of Micah and the prophecy of Zechariah, that it will be a rebuild of the temple. So the same way as the Uriah in the first temple, and Zechariah in the second temple, all these prophecy will come true. And they said, Akiva, you comforted us. Akiva, you comforted us. So because of that, that's the application when he said the Mount Zion which lies desolate, foxes prowl over it. That we believe that things will turn around for good. So even you see some foxes, you see those people around the Kotel, you see all those people who steal foxes around Jerusalem, but we believe that's the very end of the process, because the whole story of Rabbi Akiva tells us that upon destruction of the temple, it's also building the Mashiach, which means we, from the fact that we see what we lost, we understand what we need, and we fix and we repair and we do tikkun in order to bring the redemption. We are about to finish. We said, Ata Adonai Lolam Tishev, Kisacha Ledor Vador, yet you Hashem are enthroned forever, your throne is ageless, which means if you look at the kotel of the western wall, it never destroyed. We live a short period of lives, we live 80, 90 years of life, but we want to emphasize that we are not like a widow, that the husband will never come back. We said here, Lama lanetzach tishkachenu, why do you ignore us eternally, forsake us so long? So it put in a question mark, which means we are not like a widow that thinking that the husband never come back. we don't want to feel ke'almana. We want to follow strongly the belief that God is eternal, and therefore is no such a thing like the Nietzsche said, that God, anything like that, dead and terrible thing like that. We believe that God is here as a divine God, and we are not like we do not like Almanah, and we ask God to remember past, present, and future, and we ask for rejuvenation. We ask for innovations. It's called in Hebrew hitchadshut. Because God is forever, we don't want to feel a distance. We want the husband back in the Song of Songs. That's the language. We said in Song of Songs, Dodi chamak avar, ki cholat ahava ani. Like my beloved ran away from me, but that's for short time, because I am in a deep love and I want him back. So in the language of men and women, we want to express our need to rejuvenate the covenant between the Almighty and us, and then all the others will happen. So you see, in a spiritual life, when you study something, it's not like a new car. When you're driving a new car, you pull it out of the car dealership, it's worth 20% less. You take a new shirt, use it, the minute you take out the cover, it's worth nothing, right? Versus in the Torah, every time you study, you discover a new thing. That's in the spiritual world. Every time, it's a new thing. So he said, Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva. For bring us to you back, Hashem, and we'll return. Chadesh yameinu kikedem. That's what we said. We return the Torah to the ark. Renew our days as of old. Which means we ask when we close the ark, we ask God to close the circle. We don't want the new in that sense. We want what we have earlier, which means the Midrash tells us that when it was the time of Sinai, we basically return to the original first man before the sin, which means at the beginning, Garden of Eden, right? And then all the process, and then return. But it's very important to remember that this midrashic telling that the baby learned the entire Torah before he was born, and all life is the challenge to just regress and refresh what he learned. In a sense, it's much easier to come back than to start to invent something new. So the entire book is for this sentence, Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuga. Bring us back to you, Hashem, and we shall return. That's the whole idea of that God said, Shuvo elai ve'ashuva alechem. Return to me. God is standing there and says, I'll love to come back. But if you read here the Ibn Ezra and the Rashi, both of them pointed out that the whole point of Hashivenu, Rashi said, מפני שמסיים בדברי תוכחה הוא צריך לכל מקרא שלפניו פעם אחרת. He says, because the same way as Isaiah and the Ecclesiastics, that they finish with the word of admonition, so you need to repeat that sentence. So that's the reason why we said, Ki ma'os me'astanu, even you have utterly rejected us, you have already raged sufficiently against us. Which means that we said here that God, even it looks like you're angry at us, but what we said in the after of the Passover, the Shabbat HaGadol, we said, וערבה להשם מנחת יהודה וירושלים כי ימי עולם וכשנים קדמוניות. We asked to be like, it's much easier to go back to the time that was original, because if you light the candles, it's much easier to relight it if it's extinguished. So here, the Ibn Ezra said, he ended, he said, וישר בעיניי להיות כי קצבתנו יותר מדי, that it was overwhelming already. So he said, וינחם את האבלים ויעמיד השר מיכאל להמליץ טוב על ישראל. So here is a very important, the idea of coming back to the key point. The whole chapter, and even you say the whole book, it's for this purpose. If you ask, like the Gemara asked in Sanhedrin, where is the story of the resurrection of the dead, or the Garden of Eden? In a way, it's hard to find the Torah. Yes, some say that it's written, you you'll go and die with your fathers, and then the nation will come, and so it's like implications. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Perek Chelek, tells a lot of example of implication for the resurrection of the dead. But the truth of the matter, if you look carefully and you believe the divinity of the Torah, we are in the state of life without death before. Meaning, if you look carefully of the story of Adam before the sin, Adam and Eve before the sin, it's not something that we're inventing from nothing. It happened that it was even a short time, Friday, but it was a time that the first man, Adam and Eve, lived forever, and then it was a decree of death. So even you don't see in the Tanakh a clear sign of the resurrection. In a sense, you need to find implication, but if you believe merely the fact that Adam and Eve was there forever before the decree of death, it means that it was a state that we are, in our language, returned to God, that we are together with God. Now, the Gemara tells us that the story of Abraham, Isaac, and all of that, it was before the giving of the Torah, which means there was a time that they did voluntarily act, but it wasn't a mitzvot. And we just studied in the Daf Yomi the whole idea of what the Rambam said at the end of the days, the Messianic era. So the Gemara asks, what happens if you bury someone that carries a mix in wool and linen? So there's a question, what do you do at the time of resurrection, since is no more application of mitzvot? So what is the idea? That we ask that we want to be back at the time of King David and Solomon. But Rav Kook added to that a very important point, and he said it's not just asking to return to that time. We want the whole idea of being taught exile, being to all of this experience, that's the fruits of our suffering, which means all this exile is in order for us to return, but return with a better result, which means all this experience that we collected, all these life experiences, good and bad, but all these experiences will help us to bring ourselves to the state of completion at the end of the days. That's the whole idea of the history. So we basically ask God for help. It's like Rabbi Yoel Schwartz said, that what happened with the prayer, because this chapter dealing with prayer, he explained that it's a strong belief that prayer can make a difference. Yes, we read a story about the prophet Samuel that he cried all night and his prayer did not accept, but we believe that it's not such a thing, prayer not accepted. There are prayer that accepted in a different form that we think. So the whole idea of faith that God created the world and each prayer makes a difference is crucial. So what we said here, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha Ben Hashuva, we don't want to finish with the sad line, so we repeat Hashivenu again, and we said, please God, bring us back to you Hashem and we will return. So we're asking God to, in a way, to make the effort. In other words, we ask God to bring, is like moving in our language, to us, and we make the commitment, which means we don't ask only for the cause and result, that because if you God come to us, we'll return to you. We want to have the opportunity to feel. The Kuzari tells us, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi tells us, that why all this prophecy for the second temple did not fulfill. It's because God gave the opportunity, but we didn't follow. It's like we said every time after putting the head down, we said we don't know what to do because our eyes is upon you. V'anachnu lo neda. We don't know how. So the whole idea of teshuvah is basically we want to reach a point, like the Rambam said, that the real teshuvah is out of love, that all the sin turned to be a zchuyot, privileges. So meaning that we want to return, we want the combination of both. We want the feeling that God opened the door for us, and God said, yes, I opened the door for you, Chadesh Emenu Kikenem. And that's come from the strong belief that all of this time of Eicha will turn around and will be a time not only building the Beit HaMikdash, but when we read the book of Eicha, we read it in the melody of Esther, which is the melody of celebrations. And we believe that out of all these ashes, out of all this agony come the goodness. And that's the important part of tefillah. That's important key point of the entire Book of Lamentation, to reach the point of real teshuvah, making the self-search, embedding ourselves, building bridges between us and our fellow, and reaching a point that we'll be able together to walk in the Mitzvah Shem soon, the third Beit HaMikdash, Sheibane b'mehera b'yameinu, Amen.
Sarah